The Quiet Panic. You guys have been asking me to cover this for months, and honestly, I kept putting it off because this story genuinely freaked me out. But after diving deep into the research and talking to people who've actually experienced this firsthand, I finally have enough material to tell you what's really going on. It started with a single Reddit post that went viral 3 years ago. A user named Throwaway Dreamer posted in a paranormal subreddit with a simple question. Has anyone else had the nightmare about the woman in the red dress after seeing that painting at the Whitmore gallery? Within hours, the post had hundreds of comments from people all over the world describing the exact same dream, the exact same terrifying nightmare. Now, before you roll your eyes and click away thinking this is just some internet hoax, let me tell you something that'll make you think twice. I've spent the last 6 months tracking down over 40 people who claim they've had this nightmare, and their stories are disturbingly consistent. We're talking about people who've never met, never spoken, living in completely different countries, all describing identical dream sequences down to the smallest details. The painting in question is called Evening Reverie, by an artist named Marcus Delacroix. It hangs in the Whitmore Gallery in downtown Portland, Oregon. At first glance, it looks like your typical 19th century portrait. A woman in an elegant red dress sits in what appears to be a Victorian parlor. Her hands are folded in her lap, and she's staring directly at the viewer with these piercing dark eyes. The brushwork is exquisite, the colors rich and vibrant. Art critics have praised it as one of Delacroix's finest works. But here's where it gets weird. Everyone who has the nightmare describes seeing this woman step out of the painting and walk through their house. She doesn't speak, doesn't make any sound at all. She just moves from room to room, examining everything with those same dark eyes from the portrait. People wake up in a cold sweat. And here's the kicker. Many of them report finding wet footprints on their floors the next morning. I know what you're thinking. Mass hysteria, right? People read about the nightmare online and then their subconscious creates the experience. That's what I thought too, until I discovered something that changed everything. Sarah Chen, a 34-year-old teacher from Seattle, visited the Whitmore Gallery on a weekend trip to Portland. She'd never heard of the painting, never seen it online, never read any of the Reddit posts. She was just browsing the gallery with her sister when she stopped in front of Evening Reverie. She told me she felt drawn to it, like she couldn't look away. She stood there for maybe 5 minutes just studying every detail of the woman's face. That night, back in her hotel room, Sarah had the nightmare. The woman in the red dress walked through her hotel room, opened the bathroom door, stood at the foot of her bed, and then simply vanished. Sarah woke up gasping for air. When she went to get a glass of water, she found wet footprints leading from the bathroom to her bed. The next morning, she mentioned the strange dream to the hotel concierge, who went pale and asked her if she'd visited any art galleries recently. Turns out this wasn't the first time a guest had reported this exact nightmare after visiting the Whitmore Gallery. But Sarah's story gets even stranger. When she got home to Seattle, she couldn't stop thinking about the painting. She found herself researching Marcus Delacroix online, trying to learn more about the artist and this particular piece. What she discovered made her blood run cold. Marcus Delacroix painted Evening Reverie in 1847, but the woman in the portrait was never identified. There are no records of who she was, no sketches or studies for the painting, nothing. It's as if she appeared in Delacroix's studio one day and vanished the next. Even more disturbing, Delacroix's personal journals from that time period have several pages torn out, specifically the pages that would have covered the weeks he was working on this painting. The painting itself has a dark history. It's changed hands dozens of times over the past century and a half. Previous owners have reported strange occurrences. Cold spots in the room where it hangs, the feeling of being watched, and yes, several documented cases of people having the same recurring nightmare. In 1923, a wealthy collector named Theodore Ashford bought the painting for his mansion in New York. Within 6 months, 3 of his house guests had reported the nightmare. Ashford himself began experiencing it weekly. His diary entries from that period described the woman as becoming more vivid, more real with each dream. He wrote about how she would linger longer in each room, how her eyes seemed to follow him even in the dream state. The final entry in Ashford's diary is particularly chilling. He wrote, "She spoke to me last night. For the first time, she opened her mouth and spoke. She said she's been waiting so long and that soon she won't need to visit us in dreams anymore." 3 days later, Ashford was found dead in his study, sitting in a chair directly facing the painting. The official cause of death was a heart attack, but the servants reported that his eyes were wide open, staring at the portrait, and his face was frozen in an expression of absolute terror. The painting was sold immediately after Ashford's death. It bounced around private collections for decades, and each time, the same pattern emerged. Viewers would have the nightmare, the dreams would become more frequent and more vivid, and eventually the owners would get rid of the painting as quickly as possible. Dr. Rebecca Martinez, a sleep specialist I spoke with, has been studying this phenomenon for the past 2 years. She's interviewed over 60 people who claim to have experienced the nightmare. According to her research, the dreams follow a specific pattern that escalates over time. First, people have the basic nightmare. The woman walks through their space and disappears. This usually happens within 24 to 48 hours of viewing the painting. If they don't see the painting again, the nightmares typically stop after a week or 2. But here's where it gets really disturbing. People who return to view the painting or who spend extended time looking at it report that the nightmares become more intense. The woman stays longer in the dreams. She begins to interact with objects in their homes. Some people report that she starts to acknowledge their presence, turning to look directly at them. In the most severe cases, people report that the woman begins to speak. Dr. Martinez has documented 12 cases where the dreamer claims the woman communicated with them. In every single case, the woman allegedly says the same thing. "I've been waiting for you." What makes this even more unsettling is that several of these people have no connection to each other, yet they all report identical dialogue and interactions. The woman apparently asks the same questions, makes the same gestures, even sits in the same positions within their dreams. One man I interviewed, David Rodriguez from Phoenix, told me about his experience after visiting the gallery during a business trip. The first nightmare was standard. The woman walked through his hotel room and vanished. But David made a crucial mistake. He was so intrigued by the dream that he returned to the gallery the next day to look at the painting again. That's when things escalated quickly. The second night, the woman didn't just walk through his space, she rearranged things. David woke up to find his hotel room exactly as it had been arranged in his dream. His suitcase had been moved, his clothes folded differently. Even his toothbrush was in a different position. By the fourth night, David said the woman was sitting on the edge of his bed when he became aware in the dream. She looked directly at him and smiled. That's when she spoke for the first time, asking him why he'd come back to see her. David cut his business trip short and flew home immediately. But the nightmares followed him. For 3 weeks, the woman visited him nightly. Each time she became more conversational, more present. She began asking him about his life, his family, his fears. The final nightmare David experienced was different from all the others. Instead of the woman visiting his space, he found himself standing in the Victorian parlor from the painting. The woman was there, still in her red dress, but now she was standing, walking around the room, showing him various objects and explaining their significance. When David woke up from that dream, he knew something had changed. He couldn't explain it, but he felt different, like something had been taken from him or something had been left behind. That was 2 months ago, and David hasn't had the nightmare since. But here's the thing that really disturbs me about his case, and this is something Dr. Martinez has noticed in her research too. People who reach that final stage where they find themselves inside the painting's world, they all report the same feeling afterward. They describe it as a profound sense of loss, like they've left a piece of themselves behind. I decided I needed to see this painting for myself. Against the advice of literally everyone I'd interviewed, I booked a flight to Portland. The Whitmore Gallery is this small, intimate space tucked between a coffee shop and a bookstore on Northwest 23rd Avenue. The moment I walked in, I could feel the weight of the place. It's hard to explain, but there was this heaviness in the air, like the building itself was holding its breath. The painting hangs in the back corner of the main gallery, positioned so that it's the first thing you see when you round the corner from the entrance hallway. I'm not going to lie to you guys. Standing in front of Evening Reverie was one of the most unsettling experiences of my life. The woman's eyes really do seem to follow you as you move. I know that's a common optical illusion with portraits, but this felt different, more intentional. I found myself studying every brushstroke, every shadow, trying to understand what made this particular painting so different from the thousands of other portraits painted in that era. The gallery owner, Margaret Whitmore, agreed to speak with me about the painting's history at her gallery. She inherited the business from her father, who bought Evening Reverie at an estate sale in 1987. According to Margaret, her father was initially thrilled with the acquisition. Delacroix's work rarely comes up for sale, and he got it for a fraction of what it should have been worth. But within months of hanging the painting, Margaret's father started getting complaints from visitors. People would approach the front desk asking about the woman in the red dress they dreamed about. At first, he thought it was coincidence. maybe one or two people having vivid dreams after visiting the gallery. But the reports kept coming. Margaret told me her father kept a log of every person who reported the nightmare. By the time he passed away in 2003, he documented over 300 cases. Margaret inherited both the gallery and the log, and she's continued tracking the incidents. What's really interesting is the pattern Margaret has observed. The nightmares aren't random. They seem to cluster around certain times of the year. October and November see the highest number of reports, while summer months are relatively quiet. Margaret has no explanation for this seasonal variation, but the data is undeniable. She also mentioned something that made my skin crawl. About once every 5 years, someone will come into the gallery claiming they recognize the woman in the painting. They'll insist they've met her before, that she looks exactly like someone they knew years ago. Margaret has had 12 people make this claim over the past 2 decades, and here's the disturbing part. None of them can remember where or when they supposedly met this woman. The most recent case happened just 6 months ago. An elderly man named Frank Miller visited the gallery with his daughter. The moment he saw Evening Reverie, he became agitated, insisting that the woman was named Catherine and that he danced with her at his high school prom in 1962. His daughter was confused because she'd never heard him mention anyone named Catherine before. Frank became so upset that they had to leave the gallery early. That night he had the nightmare, but according to his daughter, his version was different from all the others. Instead of the woman walking through his house, Frank dreamed that he was back at his high school prom, dancing with Catherine in her red dress. In the dream, she kept whispering that she'd been looking for him for so long, that she'd been waiting all these years for him to find her again. Frank's daughter called Margaret the next day, desperate for answers. She'd found her father sitting in his kitchen at 3 a.m, staring at an empty chair and talking to someone who wasn't there. When she asked who he was talking to, Frank said Catherine had come to visit just like she promised she would in the dream. Frank passed away peacefully in his sleep 2 weeks later. His daughter swears that in his final moments he was smiling and reaching towards something or someone she couldn't see. Now I know what you're thinking. These could all be coincidences or the power of suggestion or people's minds playing tricks on them. That's what I kept telling myself right up until my first night back in my hotel room. I had the nightmare. The exact nightmare that dozens of people had described to me in perfect detail. The woman in the red dress walked through my hotel room, examined my laptop, stood at the window looking out at the Portland skyline, and then turned to stare directly at me for what felt like an eternity before vanishing. I woke up drenched in sweat, my heart pounding so hard I thought I was having a cardiac event. But here's the thing that really messed me up. When I got up to splash water on my face, there were wet footprints on the carpet leading from the bathroom to my bed. Actual physical footprints that hadn't been there when I went to sleep. So there you have it, guys. I flew to Portland expecting to debunk this whole thing, to find some rational explanation for why people across the world are having identical nightmares about a painting. Instead, I came back with wet footprints on my hotel room floor and questions I'll probably never get answers to. Whether you believe in the paranormal or not, One thing is undeniable. Something about that painting affects people in ways we can't explain. If you ever find yourself in Portland, maybe skip the Whitmore Gallery. Trust me on this one.